why did the goblins all sing like Bing Crosby? Their speaking voices are like, whatever's going on in Goblin Choir is really special.
Sauron is classically training his goons, didn't you know? That's
goons
part of the program.
Part of the program, man.
Hello, Middle-earthlings, and welcome to my humble, homely house for the artists of the Tolkien sphere, aka the makers of Middle-earth. My name is María. I myself am a maker of many mediums, and today we have a very special guest. You have seen his work in Dimension 20, Critical Role, Game Changer, Characters Welcome, the 2025 film Dead, directed by Isabella Roland, and much, much more. He is a comedian, a writer, an actor, a dungeon master, and an all-around storyteller extraordinaire. He's also a real one. Brennan Lee Mulligan, welcome to the show.
The highest praise saved for last. It's so good to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It's so wonderful to see you. Mwah!
It's so wonderful to see you. Thanks for coming on. All I did was list a series of facts, and the fact that it is praise is a testament to your body of work, my friend.
Dang. Wow. Come on now. It's so delightful to see you and to be here talking about one of my favorite things in the world, which is Middle-earth. And I've been living in that world quite a lot recently because I've been working for the past about a year now, a little bit before as well, but working on the new campaign world for Critical Role that it is in many ways, it's a love letter to Exandria and a big love letter to Middle-earth, to the beautiful Arda. And there's a lot of me like getting into the what we pay homage to and how we kind of exist in conversation with these great works. I love it.
First of all, you just derailed every train of thought I might have had going into this. Okay.
I'm so sorry.
Because I was, of course, going to bring up Bloodkeep, but now you are returning to homage land in relation to Arda. Okay.
It's very Bloodkeep being the first time I ever got to play with Matt Mercer, and Bloodkeep, of course, is a love letter to Middle-earth from a comedian's point of view, and then I would say Campaign 4 is a love letter from a fantasy TTRPG performer and a dungeon master's point of view. Bloodkeep, of course, is a lot of the joy and comedy. Is a loving send up of Lord of the Rings. For listeners of your show, Escape from the Bloodkeep is a 6-episode actual play from the perspective in a kind of mock version of Middle-earth, but from Sauron's lieutenants, to whom the events of Lord of the Rings, if you follow the heroes of Lord of the Rings, the culmination of Lord of the Rings is the greatest story ever told, and it all proceeds, and it's a great journey, and we return the ring, and there was the return of the king, and it's beautiful. If you're the lieutenants of Sauron, it is one of the most upsetting anticlimactic stories of all time, where you're like, right. What happened? They got the ring to the... What? I thought you were fighting Gondor. What the hell just happened? We followed the Hobbit to the river, we got wiped out by a tidal wave, and then we almost had him a couple others, and then suddenly and it's over? It's just over? It's done, man. Ring blew up, I blew up, everything fall apart, you lose. Real tough. Tough day for the lieutenants of Sauron.
It's a real tough day, especially if you're also Bad Arwen, ? If your ex is Aragorn, son of Arathorn, that's a rough time to be in Middle-earth on the wrong side. I have been watching Campaign 4. I am about 10 episodes behind, so I'm so sorry.
You're doing well.
I'm doing well. I'm chronically employed, Brennan. I keep agreeing to do more jobs because I need money, and it's taking away from my Critical Role time.
Yeah. I wouldn't know anything about that. I wouldn't know about...
Yeah, how many people have called you most employed man in the world? For sure. For sure.
Congratulations and condolences on your super employed status.
Shout out.
Shout out.
Even in Bloodkeep, you were kind of sprinkling in a little bit of Silmarillion lore. Because you gotta, if you're like engaging with the Sauron of it all, and if you're gonna have Morgoth in the space, you gotta have a little bit of Selm stuff. How are you approaching engaging with the deep lore? And I would also love to know, like, your engagement. How familiar are you with the expanded legendarium? Like, how deep in the weeds are we?
I would call my familiarity with the Lord of the Rings in particular, with the novels, right? With the Lord of the Rings, with The Hobbit, I would say 10 out of 10. Legendarium, as you move in concentric rings away from it, I would say goes to like a 6 out of 10, where I'm like passingly fluent.
Okay.
And then if you get out to the deep cut stuff, we drop down to like a 2 or 3. But you know, like we're talking, if we're talking about Silmarils, if we're talking about Feanor, if we're talking about Morgoth, if we're talking about all that stuff, then you know, like if you drop me into an episode of Actually, I know the difference between the Balrog of Moria was not the greatest of all Balrogs, right? This was sort of like a third string Balrog, right? Like I can be in that space, but I'm not as deeply well versed. Like I don't think, like the other day I was looking at Beren and Luthien, which I have on my shelf, but I haven't read it in a million years. So that has like faded out of like deep recall to me.
Sure. I definitely recommend returning. I remember the first thing I did when I moved to London was get on a train to Oxford and go on a little self-guided Tolkien tour. And I ended it at the professor's grave and saw Beren and Luthien inscribed upon the tombstone under his and his wife's names. Oh, yeah, I'm gonna start crying.
That's really beautiful.
It's really beautiful. Walk me through your Tolkien origin story. How did it all begin? How did you first encounter Tolkien?
Way, way deep because I think it was like as a child watching the Hobbit cartoon movie immediately led into this rules. How do I get more into this? My buddy Nick Marini was just over for dinner last night, who's an incredible friend. He's deep in the Tolkien weeds. He's deep in he's a cross lore hound in just many different mediums, and was also great uncle to he is a brother in all but blood to our family, and a great uncle to our little kiddos. And we were just chatting about the Hobbit cartoon as our gateway drug into Tolkien world, and how you don't notice what's weird about a thing when you grow up with it as what it's like in your DNA. It's normal for you. And we had that moment of being like, I remember being an adult before I finally was like, in that movie, why did the goblins all sing like Bing Crosby? They had beautiful, rich baritone. The goblin singer. Who made the choice? Because you're like, the goblins, their speaking voices are like, and you have like the elves with like these beautiful twee folksy guitar thing. And then the goblins start singing and they come in with 15 birds inside fir trees. And you're like, my God, the vibrato. You guys are really, whatever's going on in Goblin Choir is really special.
Sauron is classically training his goons, didn't you know? That's part of the program.
Part of the program, man. He's like from the belly, from deep.
It's your diaphragm, come on.
You're using your head voice. I want you to use your chest voice, okay? It's crazy. So it was the Hobbit cartoon was my intro, and then we were reading the books, or honestly, I should say, having the books read to us. My brothers and I were deep in it from an early age. I remember reading the Hobbit when I was like in elementary school, and being like, that was my approach. Like being able to read the Hobbit, it's like, that's very approachable. And then immediately you're like, there's another one, and it's even more badass. Get me in there, man. And then you're reading Lord of the Rings, and the Nazgul are so much more frightening than just like the way Tolkien's prose changes when you move to the next book. Like, as frightening as Smaug is at the end of The Hobbit, you get to the Nazgul and you're like, oh, the fact that we don't quite know what these are at the beginning of it's so frightening. And I remember as a kid being like, the step up from The Hobbit to The Lord of the Rings was genuinely challenging on like the prose is a little bit more advanced, that asked a little bit more of you as a reader, but it was challenging in that good way when you're a little kid and you're 100%. Like, I am being asked to like level up here in this moment. And it was but I was reading them very early on. And those movies, of course, the Peter Jackson films are like, my dad and I went every midnight premiere 3 years in a row. And it was a very special like family memory. I had a Lord of the Rings themed birthday in one of those years, where I dressed as Gimli. It was a costume party, and my mom had sugar cookies as Lembas, and we had root beer was Ent Draught, And then we had Sprite as elven wine.
Right.
It was a lovely time. It was really lovely. It was very special.
That's fantastic. How early did you start kind of consciously playing in Middle-earth in more from an expanded fan perspective? Did you see it popping up in your campaigns as a kid?
Oh, it has to. I mean, you really, as I started playing D&D when I was 10 years old, so I've been reading Lord of the Rings for a couple of years, and then when I was 10, I started playing D&D. Halflings are hobbits, it's not just this thing of like, no, we also got elves and dwarves from Norse mythology. It's like, well, this interpretation of elves and dwarves is like, these elves aren't making cookies. These elves are Tolkien's elves, right? Yeah. And it all seems to D&D borrows extraordinarily heavily from Tolkien's world. And then it also borrows from everything else, right?
For
like,
sure.
You got...
That's beautiful.
And it's beautiful. You're like, we got angels and griffins and harpies and titans and rakshasa. Like, we're all over the map, baby. We're grabbing everything we can. The kitchen sink is not safe, right?
It's really not, for sure. And I do appreciate that D&D is kind of single-handedly responsible for a really popular kind of fantasy now, which is the what if it was all real fantasy, which is really fun. I never don't love it.
I never don't love it. It's really true. And it's very funny too when you look in it. And I was having a conversation with Izzy about specifically this, my wife, Isabella Rowland, dead, which we can talk about as well. But there's in that there is something kind of lovely about, my mom was a scholar of Celtic and Arthurian folklore.
So sick.
She participated in like cool pagan festivals around where we were. We did so I grew up knowing all about Beltane and Lunasa and Samhain and old Irish Celtic pagan mythology and practices. And, you look at D&D and you're like, Druid, that's a real religion from the world.
And that is the problem that fantasy people do they're like, the Celtic Isles up for grabs as far as I'm concerned.
There's one of the things I think about when you have all of these fantasy stories that have fairies and druids in them, which is from a specific thing from that is deeply important to that Irish pagan practice. There's also a funny thing where I look at it and I'm like, what the hell? And then I look at it and then I go, but on the other hand, you guys do list angels in the monster manual. So it's like, that's also 3 billion people really believe.
Everybody's catching strays, I'm afraid.
Everybody's catching strays out here. I'm like, you can play a druid and fairy? Is that sacrilegious? And you're like, certainly not as sacrilegious as killing an angel. So it's like, at least in the folklore, fairies are sometimes mischievous or up to bad things. I'm like, the idea that you can just be like, all right, angel, let's throw down. It's great. I love it.
Deeply chaotic. No, my partner is Irish, and at some point, have you heard of A Court of Thorns and Roses?
Yes.
For sure. It's not necessarily my cup of tea, but I read it and it's fun, and everybody should enjoy a bit of hot Cheetos if they want to eat a bag of hot Cheetos. You know what I mean?
For sure.
But I was showing the map at the front of the book to my partner, and he's like, that's the United Kingdom. Why is the Nightmare Land the Irish? And I was like, exactly. You're asking the right questions, my boy.
Awesome. Truly awesome.
Truly unhinged.
Truly unhinged. I love that.
The
Nightmare Land is Ireland. Demented. I love that. The first thing in the Legendarium that really captivated me around the time that I was doing D&D was that beautiful old illustrated Tolkien bestiary. It was the first
Right. It's a monster manual.
It's a monster manual. And that bestiary, it was a way in because it'll talk about Bert and Tom as the trolls from The Hobbit, and then it will say that's one instance of trolls. Also, the ancient trolls of this battle trolls are taken from Ents, and you're like, trolls are corrupted Ents? You go into crazy, right? And it hints at the larger Legendarium in a way that was my first. And then you're asking well, wait a minute, I'm reading the entry on this and it's mentioning Feanor. Who's that? It's talking about the Noldor. Who's that? And weirdly, that was a key in. Another key in was someone in my D&D group when I was an 11-year-old listened to some of the heavy metal Tolkien concept. And it's like, what's the one? Is it Blind? I forget who it was, but it's the one that's like, no, no, and it has this like insane heavy metal. So there were all these like easy on ramps to beginning to find out how deep the lore really gets, and that was really delightful. But I memorized that bestiary when I was a kid.
That's delightful. I also listen. When you're an awkward kid whose only solace is fantasy, sometimes instead of going to play with the other kids at the pool or whatever, you're at home memorizing a bestiary, or you're at home making color-coded Silmarillion flashcards for fun, and that just is what it is. You know what I mean? It's beautiful.
Sometimes you're doing it at school, and it is putting an enormous target on your back that will stay there for the rest of your time in that education system.
It's actively making the quality of your life so much worse, but it'll pay off in the long run.
In the long run. Strap in, kid. You don't know what's coming.
Was Izzy a fan before y'all got together, or were you able to be the gateway for her?
I think Iz was not opposed to it and had... I would be very surprised if Iz had never seen them, but I don't think that they were like... Now we like watch it together, right? I think it went from being something she enjoyed to something that was a little bit more central in terms of like, this is a beloved story for us. I think we actually early in our dating, like watched the extended series over the course of like a long weekend together. And it was awesome. It was so fun.
Is it like a Christmas tradition for y'all?
We honestly, I think it's like, right now, it's on a brief pause because any time that the TV is on, it is probably Miss Rachel or Bluey. But
Miss Rachel, my queen.
Miss Rachel, my queen.
That's my ally.
Truly, one of the most moral and decent human beings on the planet, who also makes a thing that if you leave it, if you need like an hour or two for your child where you can like fold laundry, it is actually provably clinically helping children with speech and learning. It's great. I have literally watched the show not only pay dividends in terms of like speech and learning, like basic education stuff, but also like dealing with like self-regulation and feelings and all that good stuff. It's great. Miss Rachel is a godsend. She is the way, the truth, and the light. Miss Rachel, if you're watching, I love you so much. Thank you for helping parents everywhere.
Miss Rachel is for sure watching Makers of Middle-earth. Miss Rachel is tuned in, guarantee.
100%.
I know your kids might be young, but are you starting to trickle in like rings that all into the household, or is that a bit too early? Where are you at on that?
It does make its way in. We have there's little wooden swords. We have lots of little like and I think it also like, it's one of those things. I've been playing with Abria Iyengar for a long time, who now has like watched all this stuff, but has a long running bit of being like, I don't know the cultural references of Lord of the Rings, which me and Erica Ishii, who like live and breathe Tolkien, it's a constant source of playful friction. But it also makes you realize how many like references you make to this, like in terms of like, in fantasy storytelling, how many things circle back to tropes or archetypal moments or things that feel like, it really is wild to think about how tectonic the work of Middle-earth is. It is like this vast plateau upon which so much is built. And there are other places to draw those references from. But I don't know, it's like, I've read a lot of fantasy, and it's hard to think about anything as compelling as Theoden's speech in Pelennor Fields. It's hard to think about anything as compelling as, you know, Samwise and Frodo's relationship. It's just, it's so deep in there. I think before we started recording, I literally quoted...
Well, yes.
From, which is like, you know, I mean, the amount of times Gandalf's speak, you know, like I wish I had not lived to see such times, you know, so do all who've lived to see these times, but that's not
increasingly more relevant. It's on the TL every month. Yeah.
Yes. It's very relevant in our house, and it's very relevant to all the work that I do. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I come back to it all the time.
Yeah. Speaking of relevant to the work you do, I have an ongoing thing. My best friend is an amazing poet, and we talk a lot about our literary influences and the concept of literary ancestors, those who came before, whose works and words were so pivotal to us that you can kind of see the DNA of their words in our own, with Rings being such an early and impactful driving force for you creatively. What like little through lines do you notice in the kinds of work that you like to engage with, or the kinds of work you make? Where do you see Tolkien living in the things you create and engage with now?
God, it's everywhere. I mean, it's so pervasive and it's so everywhere that it's almost hard to answer. I'll say what's interesting is a lot of the things that can end up feeling cliche, because I work in actual play. It's so funny that a lot of times that things end up feeling dull or cliche are when they get the lessons from Lord of the Rings wrong in a weird way. Character death, in other words, like thinking about bad fantasy, bad, almost like slop fantasy. Slop, it's funny when you think about, let me see if I can make this point. It's a really good question. I haven't answered this question before, which is, as someone who like talks about this a lot, is rare to get a question that like asks you to like reformat your conceptions. But in answering this in the moment, it's so funny to think of slop fantasy, and that Lord of the Rings is the bedrock of modern fantasy, and slop fantasy becomes slop when it moves away from Lord of the Rings a lot of the time. That's a funny thing to be like, well, if this is so foundational, surely engaging and mirroring it too much would create the cliche. And you're like, bizarrely, a lot of the cliches are where you move away from it. When I think of slop fantasy, I think of like a chosen one hero who is like unbeatable and has like the rock hard abs, and you know what I mean? And it's like,
and his name is like Jonathan Bladesteel.
Jonathan
and he's
Bladesteel.
14 with a six-pack.
And you're like, actually, Lord of the Rings was like, there is no prophecy. This is a little curly-haired country aristocrat with a paunch who doesn't wear shoes. And it's gonna be him and his best friend who also is his gardener. And you're like, that's the archetype. And it's not Jonathan Bladesteel. Right?
Dang it.
Dang it. And it's really delightful to go back and rediscover those forms and shapes a lot, and be like, a lot of it is also like format. Like thinking about, especially working in TTRPG and actual play, you're like, what about, like, isn't character death kind of, how Game of Thrones kind of positioned itself as being like, this is the really gritty one, and like main characters die, and you go like, yeah, man, Boromir dies in the first book. It's crazy. You get there in the first book as a kid, and you're like,
and it's horrible every time. As an adult, it's equally horrible.
A real mentor and like beloved figure in my life, my godfather, Michael Kaluta, who was the illustrator for my mom's graphic novel series, Starstruck. Amazing. Michael Kaluta, who is the biggest Tolkien head in the world. When I was a little kid, like 4 or 5, he would play the BBC radio, the reading, the old BBC audiobook of Lord of the Rings. He would play it on cassette for me when I was a little kid. And if you get him to talk about Boromir's death, he will cry. And he's like, I've been doing this for 50 years. If I cannot speak of Boromir's death without weeping. It's also so funny how many of these Silicon Valley tech ghouls that are perversely naming their companies after Tolkien things, where they talk about like good and evil. It's the battle. It's like Gondor is good and Mordor is evil. And you're like,
and what's Palantir, my guy? What's that in all this?
You go like, Tolkien did not write, like, do you understand what Tolkien was saying about Gondor when he was writing these books? Gondor, like Denethor Gondor, like Boromir is the most corrupted by the ring, and the success of, like, the thing that Boromir does in trying to save Merry and Pippin is him realizing how flawed he is. That Faramir, the one person who resists the ring, is the most like unloved of the captains of Gondor. Like, you're like, it's this thing where like, no, Gondor's culture has deep rot within it, and Tolkien is making that explicit. He's making it explicit in the thing. And the idea of being like, the West, and you're like, that's not what Tolkien's point was. It's
Tolkien
not.
was so unsettled. Like, and I don't say that, and like, there's a great deal of subtlety and nuance in his works. Y'all don't comment. don't do it. But he was so black and white, if you will. And I just don't understand. Because they don't engage. They don't engage with it in any sort of literary context. They don't engage with it from a humanist context. They engage with it as power fantasy, which is astonishing to me.
And again, it's like Tolkien could not be more clear about the fact that the ring works, because even his great heroes that are supernaturally heroic, Gandalf and Galadriel, right? Like, these people are like, don't give me the ring. Bad idea. Like, in other words, this idea that like there is a culture of unique goodness is not what the text of Lord of the Rings says. It literally says the opposite, where it's like all of you are incredibly. Gondor, Isildur is the textbook for this thing has a problem deep in it, and Sauron knows that and takes advantage of it.
And Isildur was a good guy, like despite the 30 seconds in the movie where he's like, no, like in the book, he's like
that over the shoulder turn is really good.
He's a really good guy, and yet still, like, these guys will read multiple books of like, guys, I think power might be a corrosive force, and they'll be like, rip to Isildur, but I'm different. It's like, no,
totally,
no, you're
totally.
not.
I think what you can take from Lord of the Rings a lot of the time is a degree of moral conviction without moral simplicity. Of like, we know, like, we are going to do the right thing, but we're not going to erase nuance or our own complicity in this. And there's a lot of like, and obviously it's good to like be in conversation with the text and look at the parts of it, like there's a very great, I've talked about this, my wife and her family are Jewish, and you go back and read that very lovely letter from Tolkien in the past where he's clowning on a Nazi, being like, I regret that I have no shared lineage with that wonderful noble people. Mm-hmm. And then he's, he like models the dwarves, and he's like, they are heroic and stoic, but they love gold.
And we're like, oh, John, no!
John, no!
Please!
So it's like, there's plenty of stuff to engage with in the text that you go like, I don't know about that one, John, but you,
and that's the thing. Ultimately, he was, and I say this all the time, he was just a guy. He was an extraordinary guy, but he was just a guy, and that's fine. He wrote some crazy stuff about, quote unquote, the Mongols, and it just,
for sure.
We have to look at him within the context of where he was, who he was, what time he was alive, and we don't have to deify someone in order to engage with their work.
And by the way, like, I would hope that anyone who's making work in this present day wishes the same thing for their own work, to not exist pedestalized and to be a point of conversation. And, I'm sure I've made hundreds and hundreds of hours of actual play, and I would hope that it gets handled neither with kid gloves nor with an erasure that I and the people that I worked with on the cast and crew were always trying our best. That we're just guys, right? Same, all these people we're just guys, man. We're just some people that were trying to wrestle with the interesting subjects of the time in which we were alive. And I think that there's, with Tolkien specifically, doing Campaign 4 for Critical Role, which is in so many ways like has that love letter or homage to Tolkien within it, specifically in the structure of being a fantasy world with a number of gods, of which one is the enemy, which I think that idea of is very central to Tolkien too, of like, here's the assembled pantheon, and there is one god of conquest and strife and evil, whom is the catalyst for the sort of events of that world. And it's like, when I like sit with Tolkien's world building, the biggest thing that I have to change or reckon with in my own thing is like, Campaign 4 is a love letter to orcs, and a love letter to that part of the world building where Tolkien had this idea of orcs are corrupted elves and trolls are corrupted, and everything is sort of that evil can't create anything new. It's always a corruption. And to me, if you like, I add my 21st century like worldview and philosophies onto that. The biggest hinge that Campaign 4 sort of hinged on was, if you take that piece of world building, that this god of strife collects a group of people and molds them to their will, then you have to understand the orcs as being actually the first and greatest victims of that oppressor. And so all of Campaign 4 was basically just in it's in conversation with Exandria and with other things in Critical Role, and it's in a conversation with Middle Earth, in being like, what if the heroes of a world that had a Morgoth or a Sauron figure, what if the heroes of that world don't have necessarily a war that is sort of like interculture but intraculture? It comes like from the bottom up, that essentially the orcs go, this is a raw deal and you have harmed us immeasurably and we are going to overthrow you and find a new freedom and a new place in this world. And that sort of like that was a big part of that world building to me, as like the kernel from which it sprouted from.
That's really lovely, especially considering that, first of all, I love orc ethics. I love talking orc ethics.
Let's do it. I love it.
Because Tolkien himself, he's so interesting in terms of like framing good and evil versus redemption, the possibility of redemption in his works. Because on one hand, there is this kind of underlying theme that redemption is always possible. And I think no one encapsulates that more than Gollum. And even Sauron, at some point, it was possible for him to be redeemed. Very early on, Morgoth gets so many chances over and over to not be the source of discord. And yet Tolkien also Tolkien was not a pacifist. Tolkien did not shy away from, and actually sometimes you do have to get rid of the bad guys and you do have to kill them. And orcs are presented as kind of vermin and these two-dimensional kind of NPCs that are in the way of the protagonist. But later on in his life, Tolkien grappled with that. And he was like, I don't know that I like that I made them inherently evil. I don't think, because also he was Catholic. He's like, that doesn't jive, that they weren't redeemable. So I think it's really like you are in that way continuing like the natural progression of what he himself was grappling with toward in his later days.
It's really funny how I think that you can, as a writer, as a storyteller, find these like solutions that you then like come back to and go, oh, I solved a writing problem with a thing that created an even bigger problem later. You go like, how do I like, and honestly, Tolkien walks into that in a way that I then, if you look at like reckoning with the humanity of your enemies, there are a lot of other ways that different traditions in our world have talked about that. And I think that like, for me, having run a lot of D&D campaigns, which again directly descends from Middle Earth as its like genesis, I have most of the campaigns that I've run, when people say like, what's your favorite monster? I go, humans. Most of my campaigns, the enemy you are fighting are humans or humanoid. Yeah. But fundamentally, it's like, if we're going to do this heroic violence, I am okay with having to grapple with, hey, the people that are oppressing us have language and culture and history and families, and they have favorite sandwiches too, and they're here oppressing us. And what are we going to do about it? But knowing that Tolkien did grapple with that later in his life, because it's so funny, people would be like, it's very, I love the reference also to his Catholicism, because you go like, was he grappling with it due to like a more modernist reframing of what the values encoded in that are? And you're like, no, he's grappling with it because of what Christ said. Like he's grappling with it. Couple 1,000-year-old stuff being like, everybody can be saved, and you're like, oh shit, yeah, we have been having this conversation for a long time.
Oh, everybody, dang, was not thinking about that when I wrote about the works, for sure.
Shit.
There's always another thing.
Especially too, because how careful would you be if you knew that your book was going to become this important, and be like, oh, I should probably double back and make sure that I stand by all this, because there are changes in what goblins and orcs and trolls are. Starting in The Hobbit, these trolls, like if they're just getting turned into stone by the sun and nobody's got to stab anybody, these trolls are named Tom and Bert, and those are people. Those are straight up people, my guy. you get to very different trolls. The guy's opening the Black Gate in the Peter Jackson movie, where you're like, that's basically an elephant. Like, that's sort of it's like, this is just a beast of burden moving this thing. You're like, yeah, but they were like speaking full English language before. They were talking about how they don't like mutton.
Right. And because I encountered The Hobbit first, I did not make that distinction when I read The Hobbit and then I watched the trilogy. And so I was crying for the cave troll because I was like, no, but he's like the ones that I really loved. And I was like, he's being enslaved and tortured, and why are they killing him? Like, I was so sad as a kid.
But it's also one of those funny things that you have to go like, you have to reckon with both of it, because their names are Bert and Tom, but they are going to straight up eat those guys. So it would be like, in other words, it's like, do you also want Gandalf to just rock up with Glamdring and just be like, what the hell? Blam! And just stab one in the throat. And be like, that guy's name was Bert. And he's like, I don't know how to tell you this. Bert was going to kill and eat you. And I don't know what's going on in Bert's life that made that the choice he wanted to make. He seemed fully capable of speech. He probably could have gone into town and got a job.
He could have pulled himself up by his bootstraps and chosen a different life.
Or just like, what's the community where, presumably, if he has a name, he had a mom and a dad. I don't know what their deal was, that they weren't like, let's buy some cows and we'll eat those.
George R.R. Martin kicks in the door. I need to know the nuclear family dynamics of the trolls and the Hobbit.
The trolls,
just like I need to know if Aragorn had a tax system. It's like, George, relax. Calm it down. Kind of switching gears here, because I do love that you brought up fantasy slop, because I've been thinking about this at length, and I have decided that fantasy has self-cannibalized in the way that I feel musical theater has self-cannibalized, because fantasy, I feel, when you look at like the heavy-hitting fantasy authors like George R.R. Martin, like J.R.R. Tolkien, they were voracious readers of history and of the ancient epics, and so they were in dialogue with both the giant ancient epics and real-life history. And I feel like a lot of more pop slop fantasy now is only really in dialogue with itself. Fantasy writers are only reading other modern fantasy writers, and so it's just kind of self-cannibalizing into nothing.
I agree with that. My mom, who is again a beloved comic book author, who wrote Starstruck, this like incredible magnum opus of sci-fi. She told me exactly that growing up. She's like, if you want to write sci-fi, read science. She's like, read cool, read Scientific American, read what people are studying and stuff like that. Like, you got to go to a different well. Otherwise you are Xeroxing a Xerox. You are making a copy of a copy.
I like that.
I firmly agree with that. It's also why, a lot of like the stuff that I've worked on in Campaign for Critical Role, there's a lot of the enemies kind of like eroding the institutions of the revolution against the gods and taking over. And people will be like, this seems sort of eerily familiar to what's going on right now. And a lot of that is me being like,
That's what they've always done, gang.
Yeah. And also like, I actually had a question for you about this, because this idea of like, how do you avoid slop? Like, how do you avoid self-referential stuff? For me, a lot of it is as an improviser, I stopped fighting. I don't create a barrier between what's on my mind and what I'm expressing. And in this age that we're living in, it's extremely hard not to have the current political state of the world be on your mind, because it's so volatile and frightening. Yeah. So the idea of being like, how the hell am I going to improvise or create stuff with that? Like, it would be such an imposition to create a filter between what matters to me as a human being and my creative output, right? That's just a way to be less effective, to be like, no, don't take the thing that's ever present looming shadow over my mind's eye and speak to that. But I think it's interesting, Tolkien's relationship to allegory and his relationship to C.S. Lewis. And my question for you, as I think someone who is certainly of the two of us, you have an enormous more wealth of information as a Tolkien scholar. Do you buy it? Do you buy that there's no allegory in the work? Even if Tolkien said he was against it, but do you buy it?
That's so interesting. Now, before the girls come for me, I am an armchair Tolkien expert at best. I have friends who are scholars, and I would never pretend to be of their rank. That being said, I have read a whole lot of Tolkien. I read a whole lot of Tolkien. I read a whole lot of Lewis. Do I buy it? I buy that he really believed. I really think he 100% meant that. I really do. I think that because I have looked so much at Tolkien's love of creating myth, and of course myth doesn't exist without allegory, but I think he said it so articulately when he was like, this is not a Christian allegory, but it is a Christian work. In the way that, you know, the theater I make, which is also, funnily enough, like improvisation based, we use improv to generate text, and so it comes so deeply from me. So the work I make is political, even if I'm not making capital PW political work. I think that Tolkien set out to do the unprecedented, which is do something that normally takes an entire civilization and a few centuries at the soonest, which is make an entire mythology for a civilization. And he, for shiggles, did that over the span of decades, which no one has done since and no one had done before. And I don't know if anyone will ever do again. I think he was so engaged in interrogating power and interrogating hope and interrogating grief and interrogating meaning through the frameworks with which he engages with the world, which is religion, which is war, which is, you cannot help but make in the image of yourself. You cannot help but make in the reflection of what you've lived and of what you know. So like, I feel if anything, Rings was an allegory of his spirit, of his mind, and of his heart. But yeah, it ended up being an allegory of a couple other things. But also, you get into the nitty gritty of like, is the resurrection of Gandalf an allegory, or is that an element of so many myths since the dawn of time, tracing all the way back to like Babylonian gods?
I agree with that too. I don't think that Tolkien was like the writers of Lost being like, it's not purgatory. I think that...
And shout out the writers of Lost.
Shout out the writers of Lost. Let's talk about making a mythology. What the hell was going on? It's a fool's errand to try to get away from being an artifact of your own time period.
Yeah.
Like, how the hell do you go? It's one of those things that's infuriating. And it's what I actually have loved about my favorite journalists and people is the ones that go, here's my bias. What a bizarre thing to do, to be the face of a giant corporation's news arm and to say, we don't have bias here. That's a lie. How are you not, if only because you speak a given language with a given history, you are from a given country raised in its culture. The vastly more humble and honest thing to do is to go, hey, here's my priors. This is the baggage that I'm taking into this reporting with. Please factor that in as you read my work. Please factor in who I was and the time period that I was from as you read my work. You should assume that there's bias in this. And I've done my best to not
account
be deceptive.
Yeah.
I've done my best to account for that, but how the hell do you do that? Right? Like we're all fish swimming in water, right? Like we all we have our surroundings that we can't do anything but acknowledge and account for to the best of our ability. And I think that to fight in World War I and not have some ideas about the mechanization and industrialization of the world, and to be just from England and not have the history of the Industrial Revolution. You have the industrial war machine of Isengard and Mordor and these beautiful old Ents. Like, my man, you are talking about how you feel about the world based on the experiences of your life, right? Like,
he's like,
I can't.
What was that?
Right. Or just being in this position where he's like, it would be crazy for him to be like, there's no allegory here. I actually love smog and coal. I wrote this book when I was having a mental episode. I actually love the grinding gears of industrialization. I don't know what this book's about.
Bring back dictatorships. I've always said that.
I've always said that. I started writing these in 1947, and I was very vocally outspoken against Hitler and Nazi Germany, and I think that but this book's not about that,
Don't think about it too hard.
Don't think about it. You can't prove there's allegory. Yeah, I think that it is definitely true that to look for specific allegories in the way that people look for Illuminati symbols in places where it's you know what I mean? You're is Gandalf Christ, or did he think it would be sick if Gandalf came back and took out Sauron at the top of the Istari?
Right. And you're Gandalf's a Maiar, so jot that down.
So jot that down, number one. He was proving that Gandalf was not just an old man with some tricks. He's like an angel, essentially. I think that I very much agree with your take. As someone who is even less of if you're an armchair Tolkien person, I'm like an ottoman. I'm like the small
You're perched.
Footstool. I'm perched. I'm sitting on the arm like a theater kid, being like, "What's up?" I think that allegory gets into all of it. I think that you can't avoid. I mean, and it's not even allegory necessarily. It's just the values you have as an author are a product of the life you lived as a human.
100%.
You can't get away from it. And I think within that, there's a lot of beautiful things in, so much of what's in Lord of the Rings wouldn't be so applicable to living in our world if the world had not gotten into J.R.R. Tolkien's imagination. He was talking about things in the world that mattered, and they made it into his books, right? So I have to believe, maybe that's not allegory, but it is at the very least that a huge important part of worldliness is so deeply baked into Lord of the Rings that makes it relevant this many years later.
And he just seemed really keen on that. He seemed really keen on applicability over allegory, which I think he succeeded on. I think he really, dare I say, Tolkien set out to do what he wanted to do, and he did it.
Yeah.
Hot take.
I do think there's also a funny thing. I know this is where I'm way out of my depth on this one too. But in terms of the allegory of it, of the Shire and the idea of the industry coming to the Shire and destroying it. There's always been a funny thing when people talk about Gondor and Minas Tirith and the White Tree and the Return of the King. And this is me, again, way out of my depth here. But I always thought there was such an interesting... Yeah, there's Mordor and there's the evil of that versus the thing. But there's another contrast, which is elves, men, and hobbits that I always thought was so interesting of which is the one that you think Tolkien identified with of those three?
It's he was 1000% a hobbit.
Yeah.
Men were archetypal in the same way that elves were. Elves were borderline themselves angelic beings.
Yes.
Men were archetypes of virtues and a lack of those virtues. Whereas hobbits were the ordinary folk. Tolkien himself, the Shire was taken from the rolling shires of England that he loved. The Shire folk are the ones who were the ordinary folk who only knew peace and who only knew this kind of pseudo-socialism community, this unspoken communal structure of care, because the archetypes of valor and bravery were defending them via guerrilla warfare. Just a bunch of ranger dudes with a little bit of stubble and a whole lot of gumption were patrolling the lands, ensuring that they were safe to do so. And you see it even it's clear in The Hobbit as well, of the dwarves are a bunch of funny little dudes with different colored beards, and then Bilbo is a real guy.
Bilbo's a real guy. That feels to me there's an interesting relationship to time in Lord of the Rings. I mean, and one that really gets into the rest of fantasy too. This is where I've as a comedian been the best sword ever made was made 1,000 years ago. And poor blacksmiths. Oh my God. They're I don't know how they did it. My family's been working for generations to figure out how they did it. We can't get there. We can't get back. It's just not how technology works at all. But there's a very funny thing in terms of the elves, whose language is very Welsh, taken as whose time is ending, which feels very Lapsarian, very Catholic. The idea of Eden, the idea of the fall from grace, and there's this idea in what the elves represent contrasted against what humans represent, which is that I think both of them are idealized, and that the elves are this past you can't get back to. Their wars were the greatest wars. Their victories were the greatest victories. They fought literal gods, right? And they're going away, and you can't get back to them, and they won't be here forever. And, you know, from that first time of like the elves are leaving, right? And then the age of men, which is like, that's the end of the War of the Rings, right? Is like, it becomes the age of men. Aragorn assumes his position, but men as they are depicted by Tolkien, it's so funny, are themselves also aspirational. Like, if Aragorn doesn't take his place, there is no new age. There is no age after the War of the Rings. And it's almost like the fact that hobbits, that Frodo and Sam are the heroes of this story, and the fact that we split the story into this epic combat for Aragorn versus trudging through hell for Frodo and Sam, that is like almost this, I don't know, this is like putting a lot more on it than maybe is Tolkien intended, but it feels like, can my pudgy little self trudge through hell to get to the aspirational future? Like, the elves are gone, and the age of men only happens if these two little hobbits can get to a volcano. And I wonder, like, how you, like, who do you identify with? Do you identify with the elves that are mythical and historic? Do you identify with Aragorn and the future coming of the age of men, which is a level of heroism that is also seemingly mythological? Or do you identify with the guys from the place that's the most like your actual home? And is that being in conversation with your mythic past and your mythic future?
It is so interesting because it is so, like, almost butting heads is his, like, aspirational through line. Like, the Lord of the Rings is so hope core in a really lovely way, in a way that I think is extremely necessary right now. It's so hope core, but it is also such a story. It is of decline. Tolkien was so obsessed with decline, which is why I think he set the deeply ancient past on such a high pedestal, because it needed to contrast with the present of Rings to showcase that it was a world in decline. Because the conceit of Rings is that it is the history of our world, which is even more in decline. So he needed to write a story that has a downward trajectory, which I do think also is very Catholic. It's like, and ultimately all things will end and we'll go to heaven and it'll be great. But yet, even though the line is pointing directly at a 45 downward pointing angle, the burning hope that remains necessary despite is so interesting to me, and is my favorite thing in all the legendarium, that actually everything will fade, and it is worth fighting for regardless.
All will fade, and that to me is, if you talk about things that are taken from Tolkien and applied to everybody else's work, I think the thing that is above the aesthetics and above the window dressing of it all, above the outer thing, that inner thing of how do you express hope? And it's like, you express hope by letting things in your narrative get bad past the point of comprehension. Before we started recording, I quoted what I have up on my wall, which is, I think, my favorite actual piece of poetry, my favorite piece of song from all of Tolkien's work, which is the song that Sam sings to himself when he's lost Frodo and is now going to try to take the ring by himself. This is a guy who a couple months before was a gardener, working in the Shire. My favorite member of the Fellowship, the only employed member of the Fellowship, the only blue collar member of the Fellowship, workers of Middle Earth Unite, and it's, you know, in Western lands beneath the sun, and the poem ends with, beyond all shadows rides the sun, and stars forever dwell. I will not say the day is done, nor bid the stars farewell. He's in the biggest pit of shadow, alone. It's done. It's all fucking done. There's no hope. And the ending of that poem basically being like, I cannot see it, but the sun and the stars are out there, and you will never hear me bid them farewell. I will not, even in this place, I will not let go. It makes you want to cry. It makes you want to cry.
Everybody stop yelling at me. Everybody lower their voice.
Everybody lower their voice. I will not say the day is done, nor bid the stars farewell. It's a more important kind of hope. It's not him saying, beyond all shadows rise the sun and stars forever dwell. Therefore, everything's going to be fine.
Yeah.
Therefore, this is going to turn out well. It's him saying, I am not going to bid them farewell. I'm not going to say the day is done. And as a result of that, and the conviction and will to move on, the world is saved. And I think it's very beautiful. I agree. It is hope core.
The characters, there are a couple characters who really did give in to hopelessness, and I do think this speaks to the moment. You know, I think, and especially the tech that we spend all of our mental real estate inhabiting is really, really dedicated to ensuring that we give in to doomerism, and I think it's quite easy to do so. But like the character of Denethor absolutely succumbed to hopelessness and failed and came close. And it wasn't proven until after their deaths that the people who decided to be hopeful were right all along, insofar as because they decided to hope, they were able to triumph ultimately. Very quickly, if you could ask the professor any one question, what would it be?
If you could ask the professor any one question, what would it be? If I could ask the professor any one question, I weirdly, it is a testament to Tolkien's brilliance that his work was so explicated that I think it's very rare to have an artistic individual who can be said to have expressed themselves and the thesis of their statement. And he definitely grappled with some of his work later in life. In other words, I think the man did the damn thing. And I think his explanations exist in real space and time. If I had the opportunity to ask him a question, I think I would probably just express gratitude and say that the reality is your contribution to storytelling laid the groundwork for my entire creative life. Is that wrong to say? I would say thank you. Thank you very much for making up hobbits, because if you hadn't, I wouldn't have the life that I have. Yeah. You can draw a straight line. For all the people that want to get in the comments and go, why didn't they fly the eagles? Man, you did. I'll tell you what, very few artists come into the world and create a work that creates a genre that moves on from them. But for that having happened, I would not have the life that I have. So I would have no questions for the man, solely gratitude. Thank you very much for all that you did. The Undying Lands were made by your work, and we all get to play in them.
That is such a beautiful answer. And also to the people in the comments who do ask that question, Don Marshall has created an actual play answering the very question, why didn't they take the Eagles to Mordor? I am Arwen, and Brennan is Gandalf. Go watch it.
Go watch it, okay? It's beautiful. It wrestles with all the important questions, and it should be very obvious why you don't fly the Eagles to Mordor.
100%. And also, may I just say, I have nothing but respect and adoration for both you and Dawn, but if I were ever to go toe-to-toe with y'all in a Lord of the Rings trivia contest, you guys would eat my dust and drop that down.
I know it. And it's consider it jotted. In Quenya and Sindarin both.
Tatted across the... Well, Brennan, this has been so lovely. Thank you so much for coming on the show. What can people... We didn't even talk about that movie! Brennan is in a really excellent movie called Dead, written and directed by Isabella Rollin. It's so gorgeous. It's so gorgeous. I laughed and I cried. What more do you want? We used to make movies, and Izzy's making them again.
I'll say, yes, making them again. Go support Greatest Treasure on Earth. They're making a wonderful new movie. And also say, too, as a minor correction, that it's written and starring Isabella Rollin, directed by the wonderful Claudia Lano. And it's a gorgeous film. It's available now streaming. Look for Dead with parentheses around the E. You can find my work on dropout.tv with Dimension 20, Worlds Beyond Number. I'm GMing Critical Role's Campaign 4, and it's a wild, wonderful, good time.
Hell yeah. Thank you so much, Brennan. This has been lovely. And thank you all for tuning in. I will see you all in Arda.